Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Dr. Prashant Arpi, consultant interventional pain physician associated with Alleviate Pain Clinics, Bangalore. So, for today's webinar, the topic chosen is chronic regional pain syndrome. So, this is one of the classic pain syndromes we see in when we deal with patients in the chronic pain department. So, we will have an overview of how the patient presents and how you'll see how confusing the presentation can be and how we have to step by step rule out the different differential diagnosis and finally focus on giving a functional outcome for the patient. So here I purposely posted this pics in the very beginning so as to see, you can see how debilitating a condition this is. So here you can see in this particular picture, you can see this is the normal limb and this is the abnormal limb, and how debilitating it is and what a psychosocial impact it has on the patient and also on the day-to-day activities of the patient. So here, this was a lower limb and this is what you can see in the upper limb. So you can see a lot of changes, color changes, skin changes, nail bed changes. So all this we will be discussing in the further slides. So coming to the overview, we'll start off with the introduction and then a brief history about this particular very classic case of CRPS and with its incidence, then further moving on to the pathophysiology, the clinical features, the differential diagnosis, and the treatment. So coming to the introduction, chronic regional pain syndrome is a chronic pain condition characterized by spontaneous and evoked regional pain, usually beginning in the distal extremity, that is disproportionate in magnitude or duration to the typical course of pain after similar tissue trauma. So usually definitions sum up the entire condition apart from the treatment and management aspect as to giving us an idea and an insight to what we are dealing with. So we are dealing with a chronic pain condition which is characterized by spontaneous and evoked pain. So pain could be either spontaneous or it could be evoked in this particular patient. And the inciting injury usually begins in a distal extremity. But that is disproportionate. What is disproportionate? The pain is disproportionate in magnitude or duration to the typical course of pain after similar tissue trauma. I'm going to say that if there is a particular tissue trauma and there will be consecutively, there will be inflammatory changes and the pain normally in an acute trauma conditions, which will persist for say maybe 2 to 3 weeks and then it subsides with particular treatment and responds to that treatment also. But in this case, the duration of pain and the way it presents is disproportionate to the inciting injury, and it usually starts with a pain or a trauma to the distal extremity. All right. So this was one of the definitions. We also have a IASP definition which defines it as a collection of locally appearing painful conditions following a trauma which occur distally and exceed in intensity and duration of the expected clinical course of the original trauma, often resulting in considerably restricted motor function. So just go back to the particular slide, okay, the particular image. So you can see that history-wise, there would be an inciting event, which would be a very minimal inciting event to a major trauma, which further leaves the patient in such a debilitating condition. Okay, a deformed limb and also with pain, which could be spontaneous or evoked. Okay, so this again stressing upon the fact that how debilitating a condition this is, and it has boggled physicians and clinicians for years together. How can a minimal injury, a minimal trauma lead to such a condition? So that is why you can see historically it has been called by various names, various terminologies like reflex neurovascular dystrophy, neuroalgodystrophy, shoulder hand syndrome, and the most famous and common terminology, which is reflex sympathetic dystrophy. And then historically important causalgia, which was actually found in war victims following a bullet injury. Okay, so causalgia term means burning sensation. So they used to present with burning pain in the post-war victims following a bullet injury, which is commonly noticed, and that is why it was termed as causalgia. And finally, we have landed up with the terminology which sums it up, that is chronic regional pain syndrome. Okay, the incidence of which is 3 to 4 times more common in women, more commonly affects the upper limbs. Incidence is peak at the age of 50 to 70 years of age, and we do have types, that is CRPS1 and 2, which were reported as 5.46 per person years and 0.82 per person years. You can see that 5.1 is more common, and 3.8 to 7% occurred within 4 months of fracture. So this is the inciting event over here. That is the fracture, and within 4 months there was an incidence of 3.8 to 7% of the population presented with such a condition. And one of the studies showed that there was a slightly higher incidence that was reported in patients undergoing carpal tunnel release surgeries. Okay, which brings us to the types, that is type 1 and type 2, which is majorly differentiated with the presence of a nerve injury in the type 2 variety, whereas there is no nerve injury which is seen in type 1 variety. So coming to the pathophysiology, so an inciting event, minor trauma leading to fracture or not, leading to such a varied presentation. You could see there were skin changes, there were nail changes, there was pseudomotor changes, there was motor function derangement, sensory derangement. So for such a varied pathology, the mechanisms also must be varied and multiple in nature. So which can be summed up as neural mechanisms, involvement of the sympathetic system, cortical mechanisms, the role of inflammation, role of hypoxia, genetic predilection, and then, of course, the psychological factors. So coming to each one of them, so neural mechanisms. So you know that there is pain. Okay, so to sense pain, it has to be through the nerves. So coming to the nervous system, there is the sympathetic pain and the non-sympathetic pain, which is seen in this condition. Okay, the sympathetic pain is more maintained by the pain, neuropathic pain is mainly maintained by the sympathetic system only. So it's a sympathetic pain. Okay, so how does it get involved? So let's look at the cortical mechanisms right now. So there's something called as neuroplasticity. Okay, so when there is the inciting event, say at the distal extremity, so for example at the wrist, so the wrist is again, there is a mapping at the sensory motor cortex. All right, so the brain registers that as there is a problem in that area. But what is seen in this condition is, even though it affects the distal extremity, it moves proximal. So if the inciting injury was at the wrist, slowly, with the due course, say about 3 to 4 months, you can see that it has spread all the way to the elbow and the shoulder, the upper limb. Okay. So how does it happen? This is happening at the cortical level. So there's neuroplasticity, what is occurring. So there is a spreading of that particular injury in that sensory and the motor homunculus. So thus encroaching on the other dermatomes involving that particular upper limb. Okay. So coming to the role of inflammation. Here, the word inflammation also means neural inflammation. Okay, which is proven by the presence of neuropeptides. in this particular individuals a higher level of such neuropeptides like the CCRP, so which is an indirect marker for the neural inflammation. Along with that, I just spoke about neuropathic pain. There is also a component of nociceptive pain. Okay, so for which the peripheral inflammation, which of course presents an edema, redness, swelling, is documented, and that is the indirect evidence of inflammation. Another indirect evidence is the raised level of interleukins, especially interleukin 2 and 6 in these kind of patients. And also they have seen a lot of antibodies which are very much high in these kind of patients, thus proving the genetic predilection, and then the important role of hypoxia. So hypoxia, you know that when there is hypoxia, there will be collection of this free radicals and then lactic acid, and also causing a lot of pain. But this is at the acute phase. Okay, so these mechanisms explain not only the acute phase and also the chronic phases of this particular condition. So again, going back to the image, the picture of the condition which I showed you earlier, you can see that there is definitely an impact on the psychological aspect of the individual. Okay. Not only that, studies have shown that patients who are extremes of this variety, like more anxious individuals or patients who are more prone for depression, they seem to have much more incidence to this kind of CRPS with the very minimal trauma or an inciting injury. All right. So just a pause at this level again to see the presentation and what features can we expect. So when we just look at it, it looks like an inflamed limb, right? Which is swollen, which is shiny, stretched out. You can see the nail changes, the pseudomotor changes, the redness, and that is why we need to have a lot of differential diagnosis also in mind. Okay, so coming to the clinical features of this particular condition, which was a condition of ruling out. After the other DDs are ruled out, it is a diagnosis of ruling out. Okay, so coming to the features, so the clinical features again are clubbed as sensory, motor, autonomic, and trophic. Okay, so coming to the sensory changes, pain. So we know now that the pain is either spontaneous or evoked, and also a characteristic feature of allodynia. All right, and allodynia is what? So that is where a non-noxious stimulus elicits pain in that individual. So even if you touch that particular limb, the patient would present with extreme pain, would say it is very painful. Okay, so a non-noxious stimulus like touch is eliciting pain in that individual. That is the term called as allodynia. Hyperalgesia is again when a noxious stimulus, they have an exaggerated response to that particular stimulus, painful stimulus. Not only that, there are certain negative sensory changes like hypoesthesia or hypoalgesia as well. So again, proving to us that the impact, the role of the neural mechanisms which alter the pain sensing in this particular individuals. And coming to motor, they could be having tremors, which are resting tremors, and the group of muscles involved go into atrophy, and they will also be having muscle weakness and impaired self-perception. Okay, so what happens in a chronic phase is, so you can imagine that limb. So there is kind of even at the cortical level, the brain starts thinking that this is a non-functioning limb. Okay, and thus that impaired self-perception is perceived by the patient that this limb is no longer helpful to me, and it is not functioning as particular to the normal limb, and thus that impairment is sustained after that, which leads to the chronic phase features like dystonia and abnormal posturing. Of course, with dystonia and abnormal posturing, we would be facing difficulties with the active and passive movements, and further leading on to deformities. So again, I would like to bring that picture in mind, the photograph of the limb. So you could see that there was edema, there were color changes like redness, and there will be temperature changes when compared to the normal limb. Then that affected limb could be warm or it could be cold depending upon the stage of presentation, or there could be hyperhidrosis or hypohidrosis, which tells us that the autonomic nervous system is involved and deranged in these individuals, which also helps us to speak about the trophic changes, what you see in the hair and nail changes, and the skin changes. It could be extreme dryness, or it could be the skin is shiny, red in nature, and the scaly epidermis, which is noted. So coming to the stages, there are two ways of classifying that as stage 1, 2, and 3, and the stage 1 being an acute phase. Okay, so in an acute phase, what happens? So there would be swelling of the limb. The limb looks warm, feels warm, red swollen limb. These are the usual presentation of the acute stage. Slowly, after 3 to 4 months, moving on to the dystrophic stage, where the skin and the nail changes are more seen. Okay, where there is more dryness, extreme dryness. The limb could be warm or extremely cold also, depending on the impairment of the autonomic nervous system. And then finally leading to the third stage, that is the atrophic stage. So the overall idea of intervening is not to go to stage 3, okay, or for that matter even stage 2. So early diagnosis is very, very crucial in this particular patient, so that they do not land up in stage 3 where there is atrophy and the deformity is set in, after which it's very difficult to revert back to be providing a functional outcome for the patient. So various diagnostic criteria have been suggested. There's an IASP criteria as well, but then the recent update of the Budapest diagnostic criteria sums everything up, wherein the main feature is continuing pain. Again, this particular pain is not proportionate to the level of the inciting event. The exaggerated pain, which is continuous, which can be either spontaneous or evoked. Then we have to report at least one symptom in 3 or 4 of the following categories. That is the clinical features which we just saw. That is either in the sensory or in the vasomotor or pseudomotor or in the motor changes. So in the sensory, we can have either hyperesthesia or allodynia. In the vasomotor, they should be we should elicit the temperature differences or the color changes and the color asymmetry, all right, between the abnormal limb and the normal limb. And there should be edema or sweating changes or sweating asymmetry. Coming to the motor and the trophic, there will be decreased range of motion or motor dysfunction, that is in the form of weakness, tremor, or dystonia, or trophic changes trophic changes like either in the skin, nails, or the hair. So, and must display, the third point being must display one sign at a time of evaluation in 2 or more of the following categories. Again, similarly, sensory, vasomotor, pseudomotor, and motor. Sensory, you should be able to elicit hyperalgesia or allodynia. So hyperalgesia to a pinprick, a needle pinprick, and or allodynia to light touch or deep somatic pressure. Okay, vasomotor, temperature asymmetry or skin color changes or asymmetry of the color in the normal and abnormal limb, and edema or sweating changes or sweating asymmetry, and decreased range of motion or motor dysfunction in terms of weakness, tremor, dystonia, or the trophic changes. There is no other diagnosis that better explains the signs and symptoms. So, diagnosis of exclusion. Okay, so we have to rule out everything, wherein they have brought in another criteria called as the CRPS, not NOS, not specific, wherein they do have the pain and which is disproportionate to the inciting event, but they cannot elicit these signs and symptoms. And then we have ruled out the other possible causes that fits into the CRPS NOS criteria according to the latest Budapest diagnostic criteria. So again, pain and at least one symptom in 3. Okay. So each of the sensory, vasomotor, sudomotor, there should be one symptom at least in each of those side headings, right? And then one sign in 2 or more, okay, of the signs wherein in the sensory, vasomotor or sudomotor or the motor and trophic changes, okay, and also rule out other possible explanation for the presenting condition. So when you evaluate, you should rule out the other possible differential diagnosis, and then we should see whether they fit into this criteria. Then we can go ahead with the probable treatment. So again and again, I keep stressing on that particular image where you saw the swollen limb, acutely swollen limb, with this, which is red, swollen, shiny, loss of hair, skin changes. So we do have to rule out certain conditions, like would be because of diabetic neuropathy, okay, or it would be simply cellulitis, inflammation, okay, or it could be one of the peripheral neuropathies, including the small fiber disease. And we have to keep in mind that these differential diagnoses are discussed with the different stages of this particular disease. Okay. So based on the stage, maybe in an acute stage, it could be just pain, which is localized to a particular limb. Okay. Say, for example, the lower limb. Okay. One of the lower limbs is involved. So you should also keep in mind the discogenic pain and neuropathy. Could be in any of the entrapment neuropathies, thoracic outlet syndrome, wherein, of course, the involvement is in the upper limb, or it could be lymphedema in this condition, in certain conditions, or as told earlier, cellulitis or vasculitis has to be ruled out. Peripheral vascular disease can be presenting like this, and certain rare disorders like erythromelalgia. So investigations are mainly, there is no diagnostic tool over here. Okay, so this is just to basically rule out and kind of a supportive system to support our diagnosis. With thermography, again, it involves measuring the temperature. The difference, asymmetry more than 1 degree Celsius in either of the limbs is significant. Okay, pseudomotor testing, again, for the sweating asymmetry and changes between the abnormal and the normal limb, and plain X-rays, because to rule out any other underlying pathologies. And technetium scan, again, is a bone scan for bony uptake. All right. And electromyography, because in the dystrophic stage, you know that the muscles are involved and what is the degree of involvement. And sympathetic block, which serves as a diagnostic and also a therapeutic role in these conditions. Based on the location, we have to target that particular sympathetic system supplying to that particular region which is involved. So treatment. Goals of the treatment is finally to be having a functional restoration with pain relief. Okay, so you can see that there are so many systems involved. So accordingly, this has to be a multidisciplinary, comprehensive, integrated treatment. Okay, so first we definitely have to go with the non-interventional approaches, again based on what stage the patient has presented with. All right. So non-invasive kind of therapy, physiotherapy, physical therapy plays a big role in these individuals. And you also have to take care of the psychological factors, wherein cognitive behavior therapy also plays a big role in these situations. So as you can see on the top, there is something called as desensitization. So you can imagine the clinical features. When you think about the clinical features, there's acute inflammation, the whole system, the autonomic system, the somatic system, everything is very sensitive. Okay, it's like a small stimulus, a minor stimulus is enough to evoke pain. Like, for example, the evoked pain in the patient, spontaneous pain. Okay, so the desensitization over here means to reduce that stimulus, to bring down the baseline sensitivity level at that particular limb. So that's desensitization procedures. Therapy has to be advocated first, because if you do not reduce the pain, you cannot be providing a good physical therapy, thus not providing a good functional outcome later on. So initially, when you look at that limb, you have to reduce the edema, you have to reduce the swelling, which is edema again, and you have to do that. Even with touch, there will be pain. So desensitization takes the priority. Okay, reactivation and desensitization. Then going ahead with the, it's not like a flow chart. It's like you can do these things simultaneously also. But first you have to focus on desensitization. Then with edema control measures, okay, and treat any secondary myofascial pain is there or not. Then focus on improving the range of motion, focusing on the stress loading, isotonic strengthening, aerobic conditioning, and posture normalization. Then moving on to ergonomics, wherein you have to also focus on occupational ergonomics. Okay, this particular individual is not function. So with that debilitation, how much he can be part of the society as the part of a family member or at the occupation, the place of his work. So there has to be an occupational therapist also hand in hand, so that they can help them to be as functional as possible with that particular debilitation what they have. Okay, and that is what is meant by the vocational or the functional rehabilitation. So we have to rehabilitate the patient in all perspectives, starting from what pain they have, reducing the pain and things like that physically, and then moving on to the psychological aspect and also at the occupational level. So to bring out the total complete functional restoration of the patient. So not, we are talking still about the non-pharmacological kind of treatment. So wherein come across this classic mirror treatment, which was actually initially used for phantom limb pain by Ramachandran et al. In 1993, wherein you can see that, you know, the affected limb is the right upper limb in this patient, and this is a normal limb. All right. So wherein in a box there's a mirror placed in between, and then you place the normal limb, and thus the reflection, you are trying to kind of fool the brain that whatever we see, the visual input, we are trying to that, but that visual input will be working at the cortical level. All that neuroplasticity will be reduced gradually, of course. So, but it has been one of the clinically proven measures in case of phantom limb pain, and also which is extended to the CRPS pain as well, and condition as well, for helping us to provide the functional restoration in that particular patient. So pharmacotherapy, we have varied pharmacotherapy agents which can be used, but again, there are certain studies which have proven which is more effective at what stage is also very important. Wherein in an active stage, steroids take the upper hand, where you have to reduce the inflammation and bring down the swelling as well. And opioids not only cannot be used as a single agent, as a multi-dimensional therapy. Polypharmacy it can be used, and antidepressants like the SSRIs, excuse me, they can be used, and that has been a mainstay for treating the neuropathic pain. So you have to remember that there is a neuropathic component and a nociceptive component. So NSAIDs do play a big role in the nociceptive, treating the pain of the nociceptive component. And anticonvulsants like carbamazepine have been proven in these particular chronic pain, neuropathic pain, sustained pain in this CRPS conditions. And it's the newer oxcarbazepine also has been documented to provide good pain relief. Along with that, you also have to understand that there is a metabolic component. Okay, we spoke about genetics, we spoke about inflammatory markers. So the other metabolic component also have to be taken care of in terms of calcitonin, which and bisphosphonates, which have shown to reduce edema and also improve the pain profile. And we have seen the role of hypoxia, thus the role of free radical scavengers in these patients, and also vasodilators, and topical agents can also be tried in these patients. Okay. Interventional approaches again mostly focused on the involvement of the sympathetic system in sustaining pain. That is the neuropathic pain because of the sympathetic involvement of the sympathetic system. So sympathetic involvement. So these particular blocks can be helpful as a diagnostic tool or a therapeutic tool in these kind of individuals, wherein the stellate ganglion block for the upper limb or can be tried as an intravenous sympathetic block. And very, very important, the spinal column stimulation. This is one of the documented treatments in this particular CRPS condition, wherein the painful stimulation will be replaced by paresthesia and is documented in various studies to be providing good pain relief. So intravenous infusions can be done, and again, most important, psychosocial support, wherein cognitive behavioral therapy has shown to provide very good outcome in these individuals, and it is a very important component of treating such individuals. So that is why again I'm stressing it's a multidisciplinary, comprehensive, integrated approach with all these things which will provide a good pain relief and make the patient as functional as possible in this condition. So I would say the most important slide of this particular webinar, that is, we summarize the treatments. So this has certain historical significance and also futuristic significance. All right. So we have certain treatment which were standard being used, and certain uncommon interventions, and then the emerging interventions. So among that, with the various RCTs which are published, so certain of them have a very positive, what do you say, outcomes, and some of them are equivocal with no much of results, either in the negative or the positive fashion. Some have proven to be no results at all, and some have to be avoided as well. Okay. So multidisciplinary treatment, there is no RCT as such right now. Coming to the physical and occupational therapy, okay, that's again very positive outcome, and the role of corticosteroids in acute CRPS as a very positive outcome, and another positive outcome for spinal cord stimulation, of course, and then the graded motor imagery or the mirror therapy which was discussed, and role of calcitonin, vitamin C, and the topical dimethyl sulfoxide or oral and acetyl N-cysteine and bisphosphonates having a very positive outcomes in depending on the stage. Like for example, in warm CRPS, it is topical dimethyl sulfoxide, and in cold CRPS, it is the oral and acetyl cysteine. These are all RCTs which have supported these elements in the controlling the metabolic component of which affects the CRPS. And of course, the role of IV ketamine in treating the psychosocial aspect with depression in these individuals, as well as the pain component. And I did mention about in the certain immunoglobulins antibodies being titers being higher in this kind of individuals. So intravenous immunoglobulin therapy has come as an emerging treatment with a positive status in the RCTs. And again, vasodilators like tadalafil, and to treat the spasticity and the dystonia, intrathecal baclofen has shown a lot of positive RCT status, and low dose oral naltrexone, even though it's an emerging treatment, there's not much of support in the current RCT studies. So again, stressing upon the multidisciplinary, integrated, comprehensive approach is the only way to go to treat these individuals, and more importantly, identifying, diagnosing this condition is at this early stage as early as possible, so that we do not let the patients go into the stage 3, that is the atrophic stage, and thus providing a pain relief and a functional outcome in these patients is very important. So these are my references. Thank you.